and welcome to a Royal Record here on GB News. I'm Cameron Walker, GB News' Royal Correspondent.
And I'm Svar Nanan-Sen, Royal Editor of gbnews.com.
And this week, a certain royal turns 40 years old. Let's go. So, on the 15th of September 1984, in the Lindo Wing, the private wing of St Mary's Hospital in London, Prince Harry, now Duke of Sussex, was born to the then Prince Charles, Prince of Wales, and Diana, Princess of Wales. And this year, he turns 40 years old. And a lot has happened to, I think, that prince in 40 years far. I suppose the contrast from, let's say, his peak as a working royal, where he was probably one of the most popular members of the royal family, everyone loves the jokey lad Harry, to now is quite stark, isn't it? But maybe he's starting to, as he gets to 40, turn a corner?
Yeah, I mean, a lot has changed. Even in the 4 years that have gone by since he stepped down as working royal in 2020, there seems to be a bit of a pivot away from what the last few years were, which were public digs at the royal family. We obviously saw 3 high-profile attacks, one being the Oprah Winfrey interview in March 2021. Then there was the Netflix documentary in December 2022, followed by Prince Harry's autobiography Spare in January, which was released in January 2023, which contained many personal lots of personal information around his disputes with members of the royal family. So, there was a period where Harry seemed kind of determined to hold the royal family to account on things that he felt weren't right. But since then, he's now kind of stepped away from that and seems to be pursuing a different type of career with Meghan Markle.
And part of the irony of that, many argued, was the fact that he had been very upset by what he would call intrusive stories written about him in the tabloid press, particularly here in the United Kingdom, and yet he was willing to spill the secrets of private conversations with private family members in the publication of the Netflix series Oprah and his memoir Spare as well. So there was a bit of irony there. He also said in some of the promotional interviews to for Spare that there needs to be some acknowledgement from the royal family, from his own family, particularly Charles, maybe William as well, if there's ever going to be any kind of reconciliation. Now, the royal family, to their credit, as in the working royals, have maintained a very, very dignified silence on most of Prince Harry's attacks. In fact, from what I can recall, the only actual public statement about any of it was following the Oprah interview, where the late Queen famously said recollections may vary when it came to Harry and Meghan's account of why they left as working members of the royal family. Since then, with the Netflix series and Spare, they maintained absolute silence, which I think perhaps was telling, particularly when you look at the popularity ratings of Harry and Meghan and members of the royal family. Despite attack after attack after attack, the royal family seem to have maintained this level of public satisfaction with them, whereas Harry and Meghan perhaps has gone downhill. But obviously Prince Harry's life has not just been this last 4 years. He clearly, obviously, as everyone does, go to school. He was in the military and all the rest of it. But I think what perhaps is sad is seeing the contrast of when he worked with the Prince and Princess of Wales, particularly with their Heads Together campaign, part of the Royal Foundation, their mental health campaign. They had these blue headbands on. They looked like they were a really good dream team, the whole, 3 of them together. But you look at it now, it looks like Harry and William are not on speaking terms. They haven't spoken, we don't think, since the late Queen's funeral, if at all then. And there doesn't seem to be any way at the moment. It doesn't look like, no one seems to be giving any indication from either side that there's going to be any kind of talks for peace.
Yeah, and I think that's why Spare is central to that. One, because it's Harry's autobiography on his life, and so it's, in his words, his take on a lot of things. But also it was pivotal in the collapse of his relationship with Catherine, William, and the King. We know that King Charles was left furious about some of the comments Harry made about Camilla in Spare, and just days after it was published, he requested that Harry and Meghan vacated Frogmore Cottage, and that still hasn't been filled to this day. So although he asked Harry and Meghan to leave their UK base, there's been nobody who's since stepped into it. We know there's a current dispute going on as to whether Prince Andrew will eventually take it up, but as of yet, no one has. And then with William and Catherine, as you mentioned, that they haven't spoken since Spare was published. So, there was such personal details about their fallout in that book that royal sources say it's made William and Catherine feel that they can't trust him again, and how would they get back to being relaxed and trusting him when it could very well end up in a Spare Part 2.
Yeah, I mean, the Frogmore Cottage issue of them having to leave, Frogmore Cottage is owned by the Crown Estate, which in theory falls under King Charles, but it's certainly a very separate team that manages the Crown Estate and would deal with the tenancies of certain properties. We do know there was a huge hoo-ha when they left Frogmore Cottage, that £2.5 million of taxpayers' money had been spent renovating it so they could live in this luxury cottage. And I say cottage, it's, you know, a number of bedrooms. It's still a pretty big property. Harry and Meghan have since paid it back because the Sovereign Grant report has shown that they have paid it back. So they don't owe the British taxpayers anything. But I think we're getting a sense that they do feel perhaps pretty hurt that they can't have a UK base. And what Prince Harry has said recently on the record in media interviews, particularly with the ITV documentary on his war against the tabloids and various other high-profile figures against the tabloid press and allegations of phone hacking, etc., is that he doesn't feel safe to bring his family to the UK because he doesn't have taxpayer-funded police protection, or he doesn't have police protection. So that's still a huge sticking point for him, isn't it? And at the moment, it's still in the court of appeal, but it appears he's not going to come back properly, and he's certainly not going to bring Meghan and the children back until that's sorted.
Yeah, he appeared to confirm that he won't bring Meghan Markle back to the UK until this issue is resolved, and also until he's got the level of security that he feels comfortable with. Meghan's not been back to the UK since September 22 when she attended the late Queen's funeral. Another thing that he said in that ITV documentary, which aired in July of this year, was he was asked whether his pursuit of holding the tabloids to account had in some way destroyed his relationship with members of the royal family, and he said it was central to it, and that they had differing perspectives on it, and that he felt that they should join him in his legal action against numerous tabloids. So as recently as July, he did admit that his relationship with his family is in tatters.
Court documents have shown that Prince William also had a big dispute with the Sun and publishers of the Sun and the News of the World, and it's alleged in those court documents that Prince William settled out of court for a pretty substantial sum of money for him being a victim of phone hacking. Prince Harry decided to do it very differently. He said, well, Prince Harry alleged, or his lawyers alleged in these court documents, that there was a secret agreement between Buckingham Palace and that particular tabloid group. So it didn't come out in open court, all the allegations, whereas Prince Harry wanted his day in court. So I sat in a courtroom with him for 2 days as he gave evidence against these in the separate case with Mirror Group newspapers, who have been found to have hacked the phone of Prince Harry and others, because the judge found that to be the case. And you could see the level of anger and upset that Prince Harry had with when he was sat in the dock giving his evidence. But the problem with a lot of Prince Harry's evidence, particularly on day one, that it was very kind of circumstantial, quite speculative, and he didn't really seem to have hard facts to back it up. Now, Prince Harry would say it's because they all used burner phones, and those phones, all the documents were destroyed. But the judge still found pretty much a majority of it in Prince Harry's favour. So you can see maybe why Prince Harry's still got this huge problem with the tabloid press, but will he ever let it go?
Well, he spoke about in that ITV documentary how he felt that verdict in the Mirror, in the case against the Mirror Group, was a triumph, and I think he's made it part of his life's work to hold these tabloid groups to account for the injustices that he felt went on. He also spoke about what happened with Princess Diana, and obviously that's a very emotional subject for him as well, and that's partly what drives him on in these cases.
Yeah, I think it's pretty hard to imagine, isn't it, when you're a 12-year-old boy. Obviously, Prince William went through a very similar thing. He was 15 at the time, where you go to bed on holiday and you're woken up by your father the following morning to be told your mother's died in a car crash. You just can't imagine, can you? And I think ever since that moment, he kind of hasn't had the guidance of his mother, has he? And I think it would be in a parallel world, if she was still alive, I think it would be really interesting to see what Prince Harry's life would have been. Would he still be a working member of the royal family? Would he have had this huge falling out with Prince William, as appears to be the case? It would be, yeah, it would be really interesting to see what, what could have been, what would have been. But I think what we've seen from some of the reporting, and obviously we don't know this as facts, but a number of reports appear to suggest that Meghan wants Harry to look forward now, rather than constantly looking back and be bitter about the past 40 years, because he's halfway through his life, and what's kind of next for him.
And that makes sense. He's got a young family in the US with Meghan, his two children, Archie and Lilibet, and I think fatherhood is a very important thing for Harry, and something that he's really enjoying. But also he has other projects that he can work on. We know how successful the Invictus Games is at the moment. He announced that there is going to be one in 2025 in Vancouver, which they're gearing up for currently, and then there's also the one that's going to be based in the UK in Birmingham in 2027.
Not Washington DC though.
Not Washington DC. No, he picked the UK over the US, or him and his team. So,
Okay.
And so, yeah, I can see where Meghan's coming from in that sense, that Harry has spent a lot of his time looking back and kind of trying to right wrongs that he thinks went on many years ago. And also, I think Meghan wants him to look kind of forward and away from any role in the royal family, and they stepped away in 2020. They tried to agree a part-time role, and that didn't come to fruition. So I think from Meghan's perspective, it's all about what their life can be like now in the US.
Yeah, don't look back in anger, as Oasis would say.
Very fitting.
Thank you very much. I've been saving that one. But of course, Prince Harry is so dedicated to his military work, but something I think which he's really started to shine a light on in the last year or so is the online world. In Colombia, we saw a lot of it where he warns that misinformation can have a really damning effect on the world, on the population. He was shining a light perhaps on cyberbullying and how there's a link between what happens in the online world and young people's mental health, for example. As I said, he also spoke about misinformation. But what has come out of this whole feud is this, I would call it a phenomenon, this so-called Sussex squad, particularly on Twitter, who are so kind of ruthless and so kind of militant in terms of defending Harry and Meghan, whatever they do. And on the other side of the divide, you have a very similar group of very hardcore royal fans who are so militant about defending the Prince and Princess of Wales, and kind of either side will accept no criticism for their favoured royal, as it were. And I think that in itself can be quite toxic. And I wonder whether Harry and Meghan, in their pursuit of a better online world, would even acknowledge that perhaps their hardcore fan base, there is an issue with them as well, and equally with the Prince and Princess of Wales do the same.
Yeah, that is interesting, because we have never heard Meghan and Harry speak about that, despite a huge campaign on online safety. From their perspective, they're prioritising the safety of children. They've spoke about how they want to keep Archie and Lilibet safe, and also how they want to help other parents keep their children safe, and that parents need to be the first responders in these situations. But we haven't actually heard Meghan or Harry speak about that kind of toxic world on social media that you mentioned.
Yeah, and I can imagine their argument would be, by acknowledging it or discussing it openly, you're just giving them the oxygen of publicity, and it just encourages them to spew more vile hatred online, which perhaps wouldn't be the best thing. Prince Harry, though, in his youth, did, and he spoke about this at length in his memoir Spare, he had a bit of a habit, maybe, or occasionally would take illegal substances, particularly cannabis, as well as cocaine, magic mushrooms as well, in a certain celebrity's house, which I will not mention. But he has spoken openly about drug taking in the past. And a legal issue that's hanging over him is this, in the United States, a conservative think tank has taken the US government to court over their decision not to release Prince Harry's immigration record over his illegal drug use. Now, in the US, there is kind of this blanket rule that if you admit to taking illegal substances, you could well be barred from entering the United States. We don't know what visa Prince Harry is on, but it is distracting for Prince Harry and his work, isn't it? It's a lot of noise.
Yeah, and there is obviously the looming possibility that Donald Trump could be the US president in November, and we know that the Trumps aren't fans of Meghan and Harry. Donald Trump's son Eric described the Sussexes as spoiled apples in an exclusive interview with GB News, and so there's a looming possibility that if Donald Trump is elected as the president, that he doesn't fight in the same way the Biden administration has to keep those records from entering the public domain, and that he has an entirely different view on it. So that is something that's hanging over Meghan and Harry, and I'm sure that is worrying them because they've built this life in the US now. They seem very settled, and I'm sure they wouldn't want anything to affect that.
Yeah, I'm sure he's focused on being a father a majority of his time, and obviously not a wife to Meghan, a husband to Meghan even. But watch this space. I guess we'll see what happens in the next 10 years of Prince Harry's life. Well, that's it for another episode of The Royal Record here on GB News. The Royals are back in action from next week. It's September. They're back being working royals, so we'll have lots more content for you next week.
And don't forget, you can keep up to date with all the latest royal news and analysis by signing up to the Royal Newsletter or going to gbnews.com/royal.
And keep in touch. royal@gbnews.uk is the email address, or you can use the hashtag GBN Royal Record. Until then, goodbye.
Goodbye.